anymore.
Got her own life.
Yeah.
We've been endeavouring to explore the nature of emptiness, and your little story this morning really adds to what it is that can be said about it right now, in fact. So adding this as a little part of what the stories are going to bring up for us. And there's two simple stories, very simple stories, and it's a very profound and deep subject, looking at the nature of emptiness, as we well know. So we can lighten it up with maybe a murder story and this character Beerbal that has been discovered of late. And Beerbal was somewhat like the Mulla Nasrudin. He was a bit of a joker, but a very wise and mystical character. So this story is about Beerbal, that he was the counselor and confidant of King Akbar. And King Akbar himself was a bit of a character, and he liked to give poses to his court from time to time. So one day he posed the question to the members of his court, what was the most popular occupation in all of his kingdom? Well, all of his counselors had a different opinion. One said a baker, and another one said the tailor, and so there was a whole litany, a whole long line of what they thought was popular and favourite occupation of everyone was. So finally, King Akbar came to his wise counsellor Beerbal, and everyone was agog, waiting for this illuminating answer that would come from him. And when King Akbar posed this question to Beerbal, he said, "Oh, physicians." And King Akbar burst out into laughter, and everybody in the court laughed with him too. He said, because King Akbar said, "There's only 3 physicians in the whole of my kingdom." But Beerbal remained completely silent. But as the day wore on and everyone went about their business, Beerbal said to the monarch Akbar, "Would you come to the town square with me tomorrow?" And King Akbar readily agreed, because this was not unusual. He very often went down and mixed with his populace. So the next day, Beerbal arrives at the palace with his hand all bound up. King Akbar said, "What happened?" And Beerbal said, "Oh, I sliced my hand rather badly chopping potatoes for my breakfast." "Oh," said King Akbar, "well, make sure you wash it very carefully and put plenty of turmeric on it so that it heals very quickly." So off they went down to the town square, and Beerbal handed a piece of parchment and a quill to King Akbar and said, "Would you please make note of the names of everybody who comes and gives me advice?" So for the rest of the day, everyone came along, and of course the first thing they had, "What did you do, Beerbal?" He explained, and they gave some advice about what we should do about it. So the day wore on, and King Akbar's hand was getting tired from all the writing. And finally said, "Let's go home. I've had enough of this. We can stay here all night, and there'll still be people coming up and giving you advice." So Beerbal kept his answer, but then he said to King Akbar, "Would you hand me the list?" So King Akbar handed him the list of the names, and Beerbal said, "Oh, but Monarch, you've forgotten to put your own name at the head of the list." King Akbar laughed and turned to his favourite counsellor and said, "Beerbal, you do have a way of proving your point." Then there's another story about Mulla Nasrudin. And Mulla Nasrudin, he noticed that his son was walking around with furrowed brows, a big frown on his face. He said, "What is it, son? What is it that's troubling you?" And his son said, "Well, I have a problem, and I've sought advice from several people, and now I don't know which advice to take. Because if I take one person's advice, I'll displease the other, and vice versa. And King Mulla Nasrudin, as you know, is a very wise, being comical character also. And he said, "Son, your question will be answered in Pokhara." And as it so happened, this was the main city of near the village where they lived, and they were heading off to do some business in Pokhara. So even though Mulla's son was shaking his head about this, how would travelling to Pokhara solve his problem, they set off. So it was Mulla Nasrudin, his son, and Mulla's donkey. So they set off down the road, but the Mullah said to his son, "Now, just remember, son, when we meet any travellers on the road and we greet them, after that, remain silent." So, of course, they walked down the road and they met a traveller coming the other way, and they exchanged greetings, as is the normal thing to do, and then they remained silent. And suddenly the traveller said, "Look at you two. Here you've got this fine, healthy-looking donkey, and both of you are walking." So the Mullah decided to get on the donkey. So the Mullah got on the donkey, and they went off down the road, and they came to another traveller coming the other way. They greeted, and they waited silently. The traveller said, "Look at you. How could you? You, while your son is walking beside this donkey, look at you riding while your son is walking on this hard road." So the Mullah gets off his donkey, and his son gets on the donkey. And they walk down the road a bit further, and another traveller comes along, and exchange greetings, and they wait, and the traveller says, "Oh, look at this young man riding a donkey when his old father's walking along beside him." So they both got off the donkey. And then, someone came along the other way and said, "Look, you've got this fine donkey, why aren't you riding it?" So they both got on the donkey. By this time they're getting close to Pokhara, and they're getting near to the city gates again. They meet someone, they greet him, and they wait, and the traveller says, "Look at you, how could you be so cruel to that donkey? He's both to get on, riding on his..." So when they get inside the city gates, the Mullah turns to his son and he said, "Well, son, has your problem been solved?" And his son said, "Yes, father, my problem's been solved." And the Mullah said, "Well, son, how has your problem been solved?" Now, I'm not going to tell you the end of it. I'm going to ask you, what did the Mullah's son say to the Mullah in answer to this question after travelling the road and having this problem?
I think the answer would be trust your own instinct, don't ask anybody, because anyone will tell you something according to their perception.
That's the end of the story. You cannot please everyone. You cannot please everyone. But that brings us back to our endeavours to seek an understanding of the nature of emptiness. And if we go deep behind these two rather simple stories, we get a very profound answer to what it is that we've been seeking to understand. Now, the question was posed some time ago. If we create a vacuum and something enters that vacuum, something, does the vacuum wrap itself around that something, or does the something expand to fill the space? Now, we have our answers to that question, but now these stories allow us to look at a deeper way of experiencing and knowing the nature of emptiness. It's clearly indicated in these stories. What could it be? What could it be relative to the nature of emptiness and existence And we've all had our experiences of this. We've all sat in the coffee shop, maybe without a book in our hand or reading the newspaper, and what's the betting that someone's going to come up and start to talk to us? What about if we're sitting in the pub at the bar and we're just sitting there with our beer? Someone's sure to come along and start telling us their life story or what's been going on here. So we know the nature of creating a space. Isn't it so? As soon as we create a space, something comes along to fill it. Isn't it so?
Absolutely.
Now, if we turn it around in relationship to other stories, you know, like Newton or Einstein or whoever it was, who you have a problem and you work on it assiduously and you get worn out, and then you let it go and you make a space, and the answer arrives. And there are many stories that we know about having things provided that are needed when the space is made. So we know those laws. But knowing those laws does take us back, right back, to understanding this nature of emptiness. And we can prove it for ourselves. You could go out today and prove it for yourself. Make a space and see what happens. What is it that happens when an enlightened being, a realized being, a hermit, sits in the forest? He has no desires. He has a desire for nothing. So he's not chanting, he's not intoning, he's not doing anything, he's just sitting under a tree. What happens? All the animals come. They'll come sit around him. Are they basking in his aura? Prove it for yourself. Test it and see for yourself. And let's move deeper into this need to know the nature of emptiness. Because as soon as we do, we prepare ourselves, allow ourselves to be in the space where the mind will no longer be fearful of, respond to, react to the space that is there, and therefore can accept itself as truly what it is. No thing, nothing. Emptiness is not what it seems, but until we remove all that's resisting our experience of it, we're bound, enslaved by our